Hello everybody, welcome back to another video. I'm hoping you guys are all having a fantastic day. So in today's video, as you can tell by the title, we will be talking about the very long range. So this is not going to be about really anything in the short term. I will be probably making a few videos about that in the upcoming days. But this is going to be mainly focused on late November and early December, and more specifically about a potential very significant pattern change in the words of the Climate Prediction Center themselves, but also based on what I'm seeing around the beginning of December. And that pattern change may come in the form of quite a bit of cold and snow across the northern United States. And there are some very early signals, so nothing is set in stone, but I think it's always kind of fun to track something over time and give people a heads up. And you know, this is something that I've been saying and others have been saying as well this winter. Even the National Weather Service and NOAA, pretty much everyone is kind of this year just saying that this winter there's a lot of signals that point towards a very cold and snowy winter for a good portion of the United States, and that seems to be in line with what the weather models are showing. And just for a heads up, in the meantime, during the rest of the month of November, pretty much all the way through Thanksgiving now, it looks very warm across much of the United States. So, you know, there is some good news for everybody. If you're a snow lover, good news on the long time perspective. If you don't like cold, at least you will have some nice fall weather to enjoy still. So I want to start the video off by showing you the week 3 to 4 outlook by the Climate Prediction Center. They release these every Friday, so the next one will be this upcoming Friday on the 14th, I believe it is. And notice this one that was released on the 7th shows a lot of cold air, potentially across the western United States, the northern half of the country, warmer across the south, and in terms of precipitation, quite a bit of above average precipitation across pretty much all of the country. So obviously if you put 2 and 2 together, you have a lot of moisture, a lot of cold. You're gonna have quite a decent chance for snowfall, assuming this pans out. Now this is it is very far out. This is again around that Thanksgiving time to early December. But there are signs that I'm seeing in the weather models and potentially even in the kind of climatology that I want to share with you. The next thing I want to show you is the EPS, so the European Ensembles very far out outlook. This goes out to 46 days, and basically it shows us the 2-meter temperature anomalies. Where it's blue, it's going to be above average, below average. Where it's orange and red, it's going to be above average. And notice that across much of the current graphic, we have the current pattern, the cooler, the Arctic attack that we had with that lake effect and snow really deep into the, the south. That is going to move away, and as I said, we're going to be replaced with a very warm pattern across a good portion of the United States, pretty much everywhere, excluding maybe the west there, as you can see, towards potentially the 20th, 24th of November, a little bit of cold air sneaking in. And this is where things, again, kind of get interesting, where this signal has been here for a few days. This model run comes out every 3 to 4 days. And the most latest one is kind of in agreement with the last 2 ones prior to this, which showed something similar. Around this late November, early December timeframe, we see that coloration of orange and yellows decrease, meaning a lesser confidence in the heat. So more ensembles are probably diverging, which makes sense. And you could say that's just because they're further out. But as we get closer, or as I pull this further and further into time, do note that that completely disappears, that orange color. It's beginning to blossom the blue across the west, and in fact, eventually we see some of those blue colors make their way into the eastern United States, which gives us an indication that the models are potentially seeing some sort of a cool down around, again, maybe cool down, more of a pattern change is probably a more appropriate word, because this is, again, far out. So there must be quite a bit of ensembles that not only diverge from the current heat and warmth that we've really been in for the last 2.5 months, with occasional cool downs like we just had, which was an Arctic attack, but it's just been more of a little brief respite in the larger warm pattern. We might finally see a cold pattern set in that could actually last for a decent bit. And you may be wondering, okay, is this all that you have to show? No, this is now 6th of December, and as I drag this forward towards the 7th, the 8th of December, notice that the blue colors stay. They're moderating a little bit across the west, but nonetheless still a cooler pattern. And as I put this forward more and more into time, you could see maybe a little bit of that those blue colors backing down, But as we get towards Christmas time now, into the 18th, 19th, 20th of December, those colors, especially across the northwest here, blossom and balloon. So that 3 to 4 week outlook I showed you was more in terms of time frame talking about this cool down. But even past that time frame and that initial cool off, that the 3 to 4 week outlook is showing, and the weather models around that late Thanksgiving or late November Thanksgiving time frame into early December, there could be another larger cool down into early December. Now I want to show you some of the climate models and even some of the GFS and European model runs. While they don't necessarily show a cold pattern just yet because they don't go far enough, they do begin showing the beginnings of it far upstream across Canada, and I want to show you that. So what we are now looking at is the CFS model, not GFS, CFS, Climate Forecast System. And it's a model that goes out to over 800 hours. And essentially by itself, it's essentially a useless tool. It's not that accurate. It's gotten a little better over the years, but nothing extraordinary. I usually look at it more for the fun of it. But combined with what I just showed you in the week 3 to 4 outlook by the Climate Prediction Center, and then the European 46-day ensemble that I showed you, there is something in here that interests me, and I want to share this with you. So we are looking, if you can't tell, maybe a little hard to see with all the isobars and all the high pressures, but this is the North American continent. So here's Alaska, here's the Canadian and all Canada, it's all its provinces, British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and whatnot. So here's the U.S., Mexico, here's the Pacific, here's the Atlantic. And notice that right now, as I put this into the future for the next 1 to 2 weeks, right, where we are seeing that continued warm pattern, which we've been seeing much of the fall, much of this fall, we've been seeing the same pattern. Notice that we have a continued train of storms, large Pacific systems slamming into British Columbia, occasionally digging pretty far south and hitting into the southwestern United States, across California, Nevada. And what this essentially does is it keeps us in a warm pattern. And you may be like, how? Well, we have these low pressures, right? So they kind of either develop further up north and then they come in, hitting as pretty strong storms, or occasionally they develop as strong storms a little further south off of a previous storm's cold front and deliver a system further south. And what this essentially does is, with each one of these systems, especially since there's no respite behind any of them, it's just storm after storm, it pushes a lot of this warm air very far north and it creates this ridge. Now occasionally this ridge, like this past weekend, has been infiltrated by a high pressure which allowed to bring really cold air very far south, but most of the time what this has done is essentially create the jet stream into this type of very broad ridge, and that's why most of the United States is very warm. Now you can see on this map there are some more blue colors, but that's because we are currently on a very far out time frame, and that's what I'm trying to show you, that what we end up seeing in that long range time frame, a little past that again that 3 to 4 week outlook time frame, and more closer towards that this early December time frame. So again, the Climate Prediction Center there may be a little early with what they think the pattern change will be occurring there, but we'll see. Notice that what we begin seeing is that these storms, while they continue marching down south, there is cold air that is beginning to push further and further south. And essentially what that does, it causes these storms to kind of almost stop hitting the coast and start going north. So what we saw in those winters was a jet stream that had a really strong ridge into Alaska, and Alaska had a pretty warm winter that year, unlike the rest of the United States or those late 70 years. We had a jet stream that streamed into Alaska and then screamed down into the United States. And this is what caused that really prolific cold. This was also in the winter of 2013, 2014, and really in any winter you want to set up somewhat like this. Now occasionally, obviously, this would ebb and flow. This jet stream wouldn't be locked in here. It would allow for periods of warmth, and that moisture would sneak in, followed by another cold shot of air and create a big winter storm. And if you want a lock pattern, you would also want to see a series of high pressures over here blocking this pattern, but that's a story for a different time. We are right now just trying to identify a pattern change, not whether or not this pattern will stay locked. But what we begin seeing in the far out time frame on this model, and again, this model comes out every 12 hours, and I want to say right off the bat that this model has been showing this for a few model runs in a row now, so it's a little interesting that there's some consistency with it, along with, again, the other details that I showed you. Notice that these systems, while they keep coming, they don't really hit the west or even the southwest. For example, take this system. We have a system in a very far corner that are beginning to show up on our graphic. We have a lot of abundant cold and a screaming jet stream that's kind of blocking all these systems from coming in, and we are essentially setting up a ridge across the Pacific Ocean here. And look, as I put this into the future time frame, this system, instead of screaming down into the western United States like we've been seeing most of this fall, it stays north. And potentially even we have moisture here just surging straight up north before guiding its way into the cold Canadian areas, which either reinforces the cold air across the United States, and then the moisture from the Gulf of Mexico interacts with it, creating a storm, or it just shoots down those little moisture-starved systems after they travel through so much land, and we get what we call Alberta clippers. And do note that this continues potentially. Look, another one right there, and instead of again hitting the west coast, it's going around it. Now there may be a series of low, small pressures, kind of hanging around the west coast, but these aren't the massive winter storms or low pressures that we've been seeing most of this fall. And look, we have the warm temperatures stretching into the Bering Sea there, into the Bering Strait, which is exactly what you want to see. You want to see a ridge across the Pacific there. Again, let me draw this out for you. You want a jet stream kind of embodying something like this, and either, potentially ridging across the west, depending on where this exactly sets up. Maybe a little bit of moisture gets in on it, and then it follows. So that is more based on, again, individual storms there. But this is your main thing that you want to have for the bare minimum of cold across the United States. This whole fall, when I was not recording videos, I was still tracking the weather, and I was looking at these systems, right, just one after the other, coming in, system after system, and I was looking at that, and I was like, if this just continues, we will not be seeing a cold winter. Like, this is just a classic setup that produces heavy snow and precipitation, maybe across the, again, west coast of the U.S., extreme northwest, southwest Canada, and that's where really most of the precipitation gets unloaded. We see some storms later on across the United States, but they bring warmth, and it's just a crummy winter pattern. Nothing extraordinary about that. What would be extraordinary is, again, potentially a high pressure here setting up across the kind of just south of Alaska, creating a ridge and producing a lot of this cold air. And now looking at the same weather model that I just showed you, we are looking at its 2-meter temperature anomaly. So this is where it is below or above average based on where it's orange or blue. And look what it shows potentially around that early December timeframe. An explosion of cold air, especially across the northwest, but really across much of the United States as well. And some of these anomalies are incredible. And again, it's even more fascinating that it has been going on for a while. This weather model has been consistently showing this for the last few days. The last thing I want to show you is the GFS and European model. I promise I'll be quick. I know this is probably already a longer video, but there's just so much to cover here. And do note we are looking again at the North American continent here. So what I want to show you is what we have been already dealing with much of this past fall and what we will continue to see into November. And it's these massive winter storms or low pressure systems that eventually turn into winter storms as they hit land that continue barraging British Columbia, Washington, Oregon, just basically the coastal kind of central portion of the North American continent. And again, with such a flow, we would not be able to see a cold outbreak of sustained proportions across the United States, and we see these brief vicious attacks that we've been seeing, but again, that's nothing really of sustained nature. And what's interesting, this model obviously doesn't go out as far out as the CFS. That one I was more showing you potentially showing a locked pattern, but I want to show you in a very far out. So again, we see these systems already kind of begin to interrupt their flow around that Tuesday, November 18th, 19th. They stop hitting the west coast continuously like they have been doing. They kind of start veering more in place, hitting more of Alaska. And as I put this forward more and more into time, we see a really large lobe of cold air develop across Alaska and into portions of the kind of Western Canada, and that is with the help of the series of high pressures here. You can see there's 3 of them right now, and what this essentially does is look at this system right here, way off into the corner. Instead of taking its normal track, slamming into the west coast like it's been doing all fall long, which has resulted in very warm temperatures everywhere else, it kind of starts meandering towards the north, right? So there is a ridge. There is a little bit of a ridge. You can see right there some of those red lines beginning to curve a little northwards up. So the GFS is already showing potentially some ridging going on here as far as early out as around the Thanksgiving timeframe. So still very far out, but combined with the Climate Prediction Center seeing something, the European ensemble showing the cold air around that time frame, and the climate model showing that, this is definitely not something you want to ignore. And it has been something the GFS and the European have been showing for a few days now. So look at that. That system, instead of slamming into the coast, kind of veers off north. Now again, you could see there's one that actually does make its way into the coastal United States, but it's a different approach, and there's a ton of cold air bottled up behind it. So once that would pass through, would probably introduce a lot of cold air into the United States. And again, this is very far out, so I don't really want to focus on individual individual storms, just a longer pattern. And if you were to take a look at the 2-meter temperature anomaly of this model, the same one I was just showing you, look at all that cold air beginning to bottle up across the west coast of Canada there. So that would potentially, again, followed probably by a large system, maybe that one right there that we saw across California, would swing in, probably produce a lot of snow somewhere across the plains, and then bring in that cold air into the United States. And if there's a ridging pattern that follows that, which I was talking about earlier in the video, then that means that cold air might be there to stay. But again, up until that time, it looks pretty darn warm. And just to quickly show you the European model, if you take it very far out at the last image, it kind of looks pretty similar to the GFS. That has that cold air beginning to build, not as intensely, but beginning to build across the northern, kind of western portion of Canada. But again, underneath it, as you can see, it's still pretty warm across much of the United States, which prior to this pattern change will be the main story. But hopefully you kind of now understand why I am watching this, and there will be a lot of different things to watch and a lot of variations of how this pattern may unfold. But for now, that is basically it for today. I'll keep you guys updated, and hopefully you enjoyed, hopefully you learned something new, and I'll catch you all on the next video. See ya. Bye.